It's officially been 2 years since Spider-Man No Way Home dropped. No Way Home was easily one of the most hyped up and highly anticipated movies of all time. I remember when the first trailer dropped back in August of 2021, and everyone was talking about the return of the OG villains from previous Spider-Man films, and me not being a Marvel fan at the time, I was completely out of the loop on the hype for this movie. Once the trailer dropped, previous rumors came back of Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield both coming back to reprise their respective universes' Spider-Man characters. Instantly when I heard about these rumors, I bought into the hype and watched every Spider-Man movie for the first time in preparation of this movie. Over the next couple of months, the hype grew more and more as fans were speculating if Tobey and Andrew would actually return to play Spider-Man again. The amount of different theories that are being shared of this being the first Sinister Six Spider-Man movie, since Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Electro, Lizard, and Sandman were all confirmed to be coming back, Venom possibly being the sixth villain, Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire returning, and even Daredevil making an appearance. Different so-called leaks were coming out that were possibly real, and all the speculation made this movie probably in the top 3 of the most hyped up movies of all time. But all of this wasn't even confirmed and easily had the potential to be one of the most disappointing movies ever in people's minds if Andrew and Tobey didn't come back, since all the cards were set for them to return. Thankfully that wasn't the case, as Spider-Man No Way Home dropped on December 17, 2021, and we all saw that Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield did return after years of both actors not playing Spider-Man. Even Daredevil made a cameo like he was rumored to. Everyone loved No Way Home when it first came out, so much so that many people were calling it the greatest superhero movie of all time. However, after some time passed, suddenly people started turning on it. Mostly on social media, I saw people saying that No Way Home wasn't a good movie and was overrated. And to this day, people are still saying this. This was obviously the case because the Tobey and Andrew hype faded after the hype died down for the movie. The rumors and speculation were the main driving force behind the hype for this movie, so when everyone saw it, all we were left was with the movie on its own to truly judge. And this is where people started making the argument that No Way Home was only good because of all the cameos and nostalgia was blinding everyone. But is the movie truly overrated and not really all that good like people started to say that it was? Or should it still be considered as one of the greatest superhero movies of all time like the original narrative was when it first came out? Hopefully, to get it out the way, I would defend this movie until I die, and I would say that it's one of the greatest superhero movies of all time. It's honestly becoming underrated at this point. I've had this thought in my head for the past 2 years since I walked out of the theater. Once people started saying that it wasn't a good movie, I was so confused since everyone was writing it when it first came out, but all of a sudden after some time passes, all of a sudden it's not good and overrated. Now, is the movie a perfect 10 out of 10 with no mistakes? No, not at all. Admittedly, as much as I love this movie, it does have its flaws, which I will discuss later. But I still don't truly understand where the switch up came from. I legitimately wrote a college essay on this movie around the 1-year anniversary of its release, because that's when the No Way Home hate was at its peak, and the narratives were really bothering me. I was lucky spitting in that essay. I might link it down in the description if anyone wants to read it. Whether it was an IG reel, a TikTok, a YouTube video, or just anything related to this movie, it was being trashed and called overrated, and that's still the case today. People's reasoning for why this movie wasn't good will never make sense to me, and throughout this video, I will argue against many of the different narratives surrounding it and prove to you why Spider-Man No Way Home was actual greatness and not just a nostalgic piece of fan service that many of the fans label it as today. So like I said in the intro, I did not grow up with Marvel movies. The only Spider-Man movie that I saw prior to the No Way Home hype was Spider-Man and Into the Spider-Verse. But the hype was so real for this movie that it literally made me go watch all the Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and Tom Holland Spider-Man movies for the first time. While a lot of people were 7 years old watching the 2002 Spider-Man for the first time, I was 17 watching it for the first time. So even with watching all 7 live-action Spider-Man movies, the nostalgia wouldn't hit for me like it did for most people who grew up with Spider-Man. And that's the first narrative that I want to discuss, the nostalgia factor of this movie. The biggest narrative and the main claim that I've seen with this movie is that nostalgia is the only thing that made this movie good, with the fact that Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield return along with their other villains that came out of their movies. And to say this, I think is absolutely crazy. Yes, I understand that this movie's hype was built on them and their villains returning, but I generally feel like the nostalgia factor wasn't the only good thing about this movie. Firstly, I think they created a plot that could have been done without all the nostalgic characters returning. The plot follows Peter Parker's true identity being revealed after the events of Far From Home, which causes him to go to Doctor Strange for help. One of Doctor Strange's spells goes wrong, causing it to bring people who knew that Peter Parker is Spider-Man from every universe into their universe. And in my opinion, it's a solid plot. It's a solid plot because it works with both the intention that Marvel wrote it in and a completely different context. They obviously wrote this plot in order for Tobey, Andrew, and all the villains to be in the movie. I will not deny that. But say we never had any Tobey and Andrew Spider-Man movies prior to this one, and Tom Holland was our only Spider-Man. Would this plot not work well on its own? We literally saw Spider-Man villains that we've never seen in a movie adaptation coming through the portal at the end of the movie when the spell got messed up again. They easily could have casted different actors to play different versions of Spider-Man plus the villains, and it still would have made a solid story for the movie. Except everyone and their mama knows that they couldn't have done this because if they casted different people to play these roles, fans would have been yelling at Marvel for not bringing back the original actors to play these roles.
Not Charles Barkley.
Sing it
Just a
out.
wannabe who looks like him. Mari, break out. Shouldn't even be here. Be gone. Wannabe, be gone.
Now, I'm not going to act like it was the best plot of any MCU movie or anything like that, but it was a solid plot that drove the movie and kept me interested, and it could have worked with the OG characters returning or without them returning. I feel like the main problem surrounding the carried by nostalgia narrative around this movie after 2 years of its release is that people act like the nostalgia and the fan service in this movie was a bad thing. Fan service is not always bad. This movie is what I like to call good fan service because you can tell that they didn't just bring these characters back just with the intention to please the fans. They brought them back and built a solid story around most of them and gave them something important to do in the story. The Sandman and the Lizard were probably the only nostalgic characters that were brought back and weren't really given much to do and didn't have that big of an effect on the story, especially since the actual actors weren't physically playing their characters and were just CGI'd in with them voicing over their lines. But you could even argue that the Sandman had a decent role in the story since he was the only villain out of the Raimi trilogy that actually survived and he was able to tell the others that they died in their universes, which isn't really important, but you get what I'm trying to say. The Lizard though, I can't really defend that. He's just there. The fan service adds on to the greatness of this movie because they didn't do it just for the sake of doing it. They did it how it's supposed to be done. It's not the type of fan service of something like Jurassic World Dominion, where they brought back the characters from the original Jurassic Park movies just to combine the Jurassic Park and the Jurassic World generations together. Almost every person had a significant role to the story. Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield played older and more mature versions of Spider-Man who helped Tom Holland's version make better decisions and relate to him. Green Goblin serves as the main villain and has the most impact on the story. Doc Ock serves as the first villain to show up and get the story rolling, and plus he's the comic relief character that shows he's not really a bad guy once he's cured, which is what most Spider-Man villains are. Electro serves as a silent but deadly threat that could become worse if given the power. The nostalgic characters are obviously amazing to see since they hadn't been seen in a while, but it's not like them just being there is the only reason that made this movie good. They did the nostalgia correctly and obviously didn't just add all these characters in to make money and to please the fans. Another narrative that I don't understand is that this movie is not rewatchable and that the pacing is bad, which is one of the main narratives I've been hearing since Spider-Man No Way Home came to home video. The only part I can agree on with this narrative is that when you rewatch the movie as a fan, you are just waiting for Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield to show up because like I've said this whole video, the hype surrounding this movie was with those two returning. But when you really think about it, there's so much more to look forward to when rewatching this movie before Andrew and Tobey even show up. The pacing is nowhere near bad. The first 15 minutes or so showing the world reacting to Spider-Man's identity being revealed was a very nice touch since we've never seen a live-action Spider-Man movie reveal his identity. The freeway fight between Doc Ock and Peter was a great first fight. The process of capturing all the villains and the catch-ups were entertaining. Doctor Strange's and Peter's fight, the apartment sequence, the reveal of Green Goblin, which is one of the best scenes in the whole movie, and the apartment fight scene, which is a top-tier MCU fight, and of course Aunt May's death, which is a very emotional scene and almost made me cry the first time I watched it. There's so much that happens before Andrew and Tobey even show up, which is why it baffles me when people say that this movie is slow and is only rewatchable for the nostalgic Spider-Man to come in. Plus, one of the main aspects of superhero movies is to be entertaining. And no matter what your opinions are on this movie, you cannot say that's not entertaining even if nostalgia is the driving force for you. All the nostalgic characters of past Spider-Man movies returning for this movie makes this movie rewatchable on its own. Like I said earlier, the fact that they brought these characters back and wrote them not to just be there for no reason makes this movie easily one of the most rewatchable MCU movies. One of the main reasons why I feel like this movie is slowly becoming underrated is because people aren't really recognizing what it did for Tom Holland's Spider-Man and the future of the MCU, because they're so focused on the narrative that it's just a fan service movie. Admittedly, the MCU isn't in the best place right now, but this movie opened up the opportunity for the multiverse stuff that's been happening and that will keep happening over the next couple of years. But one of the biggest reasons why I love this movie is because of how it fixed Tom Holland's Spider-Man. Before No Way Home came out, the MCU's version of Spider-Man was probably the most universally hated, but also loved character at the same time, well just because his name was Spider-Man. People often said that they didn't see Tom Holland as Spider-Man and that he had too much help from Iron Man and the Avengers, and that he just didn't go through the trials and tribulations that Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's version of the character went through. Fans were literally calling him Iron Boy Jr. instead of Spider-Man just because they just simply didn't see him as Spider-Man. But No Way Home offers some of the best character development I've seen of any hero. Tom Holland's Spider-Man went from a kid that nobody respected to the most sympathetic and almost true version of the character, and all in the span of one movie. This is gonna sound wrong, but I love the amount of suffering that Peter goes through in this movie. The only true loss that he experienced prior to this movie was Iron Man, who acted as somewhat of an Uncle Ben figure to him, but No Way Home makes Tom Holland's Spider-Man, well, Spider-Man. I personally feel like he suffers more than Andrew and Tobey did all in one movie. The loss of Aunt May is what truly helps him become Spider-Man and makes him make the tough decisions that Spider-Man typically has to make, which shows the character development that people have been waiting for from this version of the character. He takes responsibility and willingly loses everybody in his life at the end of the movie to combat the mistakes that he made. He loses his only family, his best friend, his girlfriend, his mentor's closest friend, and literally everyone that knew him all in the same movie, which stings us as an audience because we've been with the same characters for 3 movies. Even though Tobey and Andrew and all the villains were the main selling point, this still feels like Tom Holland's movie and story, and not just a movie made to bring back nostalgic characters. You can tell that they actually wanted to develop this character and get him the respect that he wasn't getting before. It all ties in well and feels fitting when Tom gets his new suit at the end of the movie because he truly becomes Spider-Man in this movie. This part relates to my first point about the nostalgia factor of this movie, but if it wasn't for Tobey and Andrew coming in and helping Tom, he simply would not have earned the respect of fans. Tobey Maguire's eldest brother role helps remind Tom of the duty of being Spider-Man, since Tom had his mindset on killing the Green Goblin. Plus, the Green Goblin was the most devious villain that Tom had ever faced other than Thanos, and without him, he doesn't take that next step. Now, could they have did that in a different way? Yes, but it's not needless nostalgia, so why complain about it? And the nostalgia is definitely not needless considering the performances everyone gives in this movie. Willem Dafoe returning as the Green Goblin is easily one of the greatest villain performances of all time. When this movie first came out, you couldn't escape the Dark Knight Joker comparisons. Some people were even saying that his Green Goblin performance was even better than Heath Ledger's Joker performance in The Dark Knight. Willem Dafoe manages to outdo his performance in the original 2002 Spider-Man by a long shot with how devious the Green Goblin is. He breaks down Tom Holland's Spider-Man in a way that we've never seen any villain do in a Spider-Man movie. I feel like Jamie Foxx's performance as Electro is underrated and it outshines his Amazing Spider-Man 2 performance. He's playing a more established version of the Amazing Spider-Man 2's version of Electro, and it makes you forget how he started off as a really nice guy in Amazing Spider-Man 2 because he's very power hungry in No Way Home and can be taken more seriously as a villain once he gets his full power, even though he is kind of a cartoon character at the beginning. Alfred Molina is very funny and snarky as Doc Ock, and like I said earlier, he is the best example of how these Spider-Man villains are really nice people until they get turned into villains. As far as the Sandman and the Lizard, you can't really rate their performances since they were really just CGI'd in. In terms of the main cast, I feel like they give the best performances. Aunt May's death scene is easily one of the most emotional MCU moments and had more effect than any Uncle Ben death that we've ever seen, at least in my opinion. Obviously, we were more familiar with Aunt May for 3 movies, but they fooled us into thinking that she was going to survive, and Marissa Tomei and Tom Holland acted that scene super well to where it was emotional when she eventually does die. And speaking of Tom Holland, I feel like other than Willem Dafoe and Andrew Garfield, he has the best performance in this movie. He truly is the star of this movie, and it has many moments that showcase his acting range and ability. You can see him grow from that out of control and childish kid when he was first introduced into the MCU to a mature hero who can actually be taken seriously and will be taken seriously from this point on. Zendaya also gives a good performance as MJ, and her and Tom Holland's relationship is showcased greatly in this movie, and it gets really emotional when they have to leave each other at the end. But the obvious standout performance is Andrew Garfield returning as Spider-Man. You can tell that he truly loves playing the character, and he makes us feel so much for him when he explains his life as Spider-Man after The Amazing Spider-Man 2. After watching all the Spider-Man movies in preparation for this movie, Tobey Maguire was the best Spider-Man in my opinion, but after this movie came out, I really thought about it. The way that he plays the character, plus just his overall look, made Andrew Garfield the best live-action Spider-Man in my eyes, even though his movies aren't the greatest. His performance was so good that it made many fans who hated Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man want an Amazing Spider-Man 3. And that's the last point that I want to touch up on. It relates back to the point of the nostalgia factor of this movie, not just being there for the sake of pleasing fans. You can tell that they actually wanted to do Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield right by putting them in this movie. Both actors ended off their franchises abruptly with movies that most fans consider bad, with The Amazing Spider-Man 2 and Spider-Man 3. Both franchises weren't completely finished and didn't get the complete ending, so putting them in No Way Home to get their redemption and closure was the best way to bring them back to play Spider-Man again. And like I said earlier, they weren't just put in this movie for no purpose but to make money and please their fans. Tobey Maguire is given the role of the oldest and most experienced Spider-Man, who is able to act as an older brother figure to Tom Holland and remind him of what it truly means to be Spider-Man. And Andrew Garfield is given the role of reminding people of how tragic Peter Parker's life truly is, and also being a relatable figure to Tom Holland since they are both Spider-Man. One of the most shocking parts of the movie was when Tobey and Andrew were trying to get through to Tom and stop him from killing the Green Goblin after Aunt May's death, and Andrew reveals that he stopped pulling his punches after Gwen died in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, basically meaning that he was either brutally injuring people or even killing them because of how mad he was. Tom probably would have went down the same route if Tobey and Andrew weren't there to guide him. And even though we weren't able to see it, you can just imagine a rageful Spider-Man that's not holding back and is just completely dismantling people. I think No Way Home was a great way to give Tobey and Andrew their much needed updates on their versions of Spider-Man, since like I said, their franchises were left unfinished. I don't understand how people went from saying we need a Spider-Man 4 and an Amazing Spider-Man 3 to trashing the movie that sparked up the want for these movies. And I am admittedly not crazy for a Spider-Man 4, since Tobey's story kind of finished at least decently in Spider-Man 3, but I definitely want an Amazing Spider-Man 3 because if you give Andrew Garfield a good script, it'll be one of the best Spider-Man movies. Now, while I've been defending this movie to its core, this would not be a fair video if I didn't look at both sides. And like I said in the very beginning, this movie is not perfect. There are things that I can agree with when people discuss their problems with this movie. There are major plot holes in this movie, most notably the concept of what happens to the villains when they are cured and sent back to their universes. This is probably my biggest problem with the whole entire movie, well, as far as the story, because the writers didn't exactly explain what would happen to them once they were cured. Most of the villains were brought to the MC universe at the exact moment that they were either about to die or had Spider-Man on the edge, so it is unclear whether they were sent back to the moment that they were about to die, or if they were just sent back to their current timeline of that universe with no powers. Not only that, but it gets confusing when you have the current versions of Tobey and Andrew come in, but you have the Lizard from the Amazing Spider-Man 1 come in while he's still a lizard, even though he was cured at the end of that movie and just placed in prison. Think the Sandman in No Way Home is the current version of Sandman, since he survived at the end of Spider-Man 3, but it's unclear what happens to him too when he is sent back, since he wasn't really a bad guy to begin with and probably didn't even cause more mayhem when Tobey let him go at the end of Spider-Man 3. Another big plot hole that I don't really like is regarding Electro. As much as I like Jamie Foxx's performance of Electro in this movie, it really makes zero sense for him to even be here in the first place, and certain decision making makes the fanservice narrative look completely true. The whole part of the movie was people who knew that Peter Parker was Spider-Man coming into the universe. It doesn't make sense that Electro was even teleported to the universe in the first place when he never even knew that Peter Parker was Spider-Man in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. This is further proven when Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker reveals himself to Electro for the first time, and he says that he thought he would be black.
I just thought you was gonna be black.
This is obviously a joke for the only black villain of the movie to say, but if he knew that Peter Parker was Spider-Man, then why would he even say that? Even after watching The Amazing Spider-Man 2 multiple times after this movie came out, I simply can't defend Electro being in this movie because he just didn't know that Peter Parker was Spider-Man. It seemed like they just threw him in the movie to please the fans. I somewhat feel the same way about the Sandman and Lizard like I said earlier. More Lizard than Sandman though. It makes sense for Lizard to be there, but he really isn't given anything to do in this movie, so it really could go without him. He literally sat in the truck during the apartment scene for no reason, and really didn't add anything to the overall story besides the final fight. The same thing somewhat applies for Sandman. He's really only there to be the voice of reason character and is the only character with any type of sense, since he was never a bad guy to begin with and just wanted to see his daughter. Other than that, he doesn't really have a real reason to be there, and is probably only there because he was the only one other than Lizard that doesn't die in his universe. Now that I think about it, I think Sandman and Lizard were only really placed in there at the last minute because they were the only villains that didn't die in their movies. Not that it's a bad thing or anything like that, but this is just one of those things that you notice when you rewatch the movie. Certain decision making sounds dumb once you kind of think about it as well. The way that they word the problem in the scene where Peter visits Doctor Strange was pretty annoying, since they make it seem like the only reason why he went to him and basically almost ended the world was because Peter, Ned, and MJ didn't get into college, which really wasn't the case at all. As much as I loved the whole apartment sequence, it was very questionable for Peter to bring a bunch of villains from multiple universes into one little apartment and expect nothing bad to happen. This movie is mostly about Spider-Man growing, but the little decisions like that were kind of annoying when Peter Parker is supposed to be this big, smart, genius kid, and he literally beats Doctor Strange in the fight scene with his brain, so why does he make so many dumb decisions in this movie? Also, the fact that he just talked so much during Doctor Strange making the spell. At a certain point, I would have just said, everyone that knew that I was Spider-Man before my identity got leaked should still know. And one thing I kind of questioned after rewatching was how lenient Wong was to Doctor Strange casting the spell that he was going to cast, since the spell was so dangerous according to him. Instead of trying to stop them, he kind of just lets it be, which is not the greatest decision as someone who is literally the Sorcerer Supreme. Little things like this might be a little nitpicky, but it's things like this that made people not really like Tom Holland's Spider-Man in the first place, and just the movie overall. I've been talking for a while, so let's wrap this up. I think that No Way Home is becoming one of the most underrated MCU movies. The switch up on this movie is crazy. So many people went from loving this movie and calling it one of the greatest superhero movies of all time, to all of a sudden saying that it was never good to begin with. I can understand changing your mind on a movie to where you didn't like it as much as you thought you did the first time you watched it, but to go from calling it amazing to calling it not good at all is insane. I think that's my main problem with the narrative surrounding this movie. The fact that people are calling it bad, but the fact that the people that were calling it amazing and the greatest superhero movie of all time are all of a sudden turned their backs on it. If you watched this movie and didn't like it on your first watch, then I could easily respect that because you just didn't switch up. But it seems like one person came out and said that it wasn't that good, then everyone else just started agreeing with it to be different. Because when this movie first dropped, I didn't see a single person say that this movie was bad. And yes, everyone was fresh out the return of all the nostalgic characters, but I feel like a lot of the problems that people say that they have with this movie after rewatching it are just nitpicky and purposely finding something to call out. It's one thing to say that it is a bad movie overall, but it is another thing to say that this was a bad superhero movie, because that would be a stretch. Overall, Spider-Man No Way Home has a decent plot, great characters, great special effects for the most part, and is one of the most entertaining and rewatchable movies of all time. Yeah, I said it. Cry about it. If you enjoyed this video and my views on this movie, then like, comment, subscribe, and just comment your honest thoughts on Spider-Man No Way Home. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.